In a busy corporate tower, an unexpected foreign guest arrives. The high-profile meeting is in jeopardy until help comes from the most unlikely corner of the building. This is the story of how one moment shattered stereotypes, flipped power, and left an entire boardroom speechless. The morning began with the steady hum of printers, clicking keyboards, and muted phone conversations inside the glass and steel headquarters of one of the city's top corporations. Staff were already on. Edge rumors had been swirling for days about an important investor visit, but no one expected what happened next. The double glass doors at the front swung open, and in walked a sharply dressed man, flanked by two imposing security guards. He carried himself with a quiet authority, his tailored suit crisp, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. Without a single word of English, he began speaking in fluent Mandarin, his tone clipped and businesslike, clearly expecting an immediate response. The front desk receptionist froze. Her polite smile faltered as she glanced helplessly at the assistant manager beside her. The man continued speaking, his voice rising slightly as he gestured toward the elevators, tapping his watch in an impatient rhythm. Within seconds, the floor manager appeared, forcing a confident smile while whispering to the receptionist to stall him. Just try to make him comfortable," he muttered, already fishing his phone out to call the translator. The call went straight to voicemail. His stomach sank. "Stuck in traffic," came the eventual text reply. A bad sign. The billionaires. Eyes narrowed slightly, scanning the lobby as if evaluating everything and everyone in it. He spoke again, faster this time, pointing toward the company logo mounted proudly on the far wall. The floor manager, desperate, opened a translation app and held his phone out. The app processed the voice, paused, and then produced a garbled English sentence about harvesting the clouds and singing fish. The manager's face burned. He laughed nervously and tried again, only for the app to churn out another bizarre, nonsensical phrase. The billionaire's jaw tightened. His watch beeped. He muttered something sharp to his security team, who glanced around the room with a look that could have frozen glass. By now, word had traveled upstairs to the boardroom. Chairs scraped back, heels clicked against polished floors, and several executives hurried toward the elevators, straightening ties and brushing imaginary lint from their expensive suits. They stepped out into the lobby, plastering on their most diplomatic smiles. One executive extended a hand, which was met with a brief, polite nod from the visitor. No handshake, no words in English. Again, the Mandarin poured forth, deliberate and insistent, filled with terms and inflections none of them understood. The executives tried their own translation apps. The results were just as disastrous. One phone announced loudly, "Please remove the horses from the roof." Another chirped, "We will sell the children by Thursday." Faces flushed red with embarrassment. The visitor's brows furrowed deeper, and his voice took on an unmistakably irritated edge. He gestured toward the glass doors as if preparing to leave. The security guards shifted slightly, one of them already moving toward the exit. The floor manager's heart pounded. This was a disaster in motion months of negotiations, the potential for millions in investment, slipping away in real time. He blurted out something in broken English, hoping the visitor might understand a few words, but the man simply tilted his head, his expression unreadable. A silence fell, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the faint buzz of the lobby lights. The staff stood, frozen, caught between shame and desperation, and then sound. Not the usual clatter of office shoes, or the ping of the elevator. The faint, rhythmic swish of a mop across polished tiles. In the far corner of the lobby, a man in a work uniform was quietly sweeping up a small pile of dust. His head was down, movement steady and unhurried, as if the chaos around him didn't exist. But his eyes were fixed on the visitor. Each syllable of Mandarin had reached him clearly. He paused mid-sweep, resting one hand on the mop handle. For a moment he said nothing, just listened, brows slightly drawn in concentration. The billionaire repeated his demand for a tour, his tone sharper now. The workman's gaze lifted fully, meeting the visitor's eyes across the room. And then, in a voice calm but confident, he spoke. Not in English, not in broken phrases. Fluent, precise Mandarin rolled effortlessly off his tongue, rich in tone, perfect in accent. The effect was immediate. The billionaire's words faltered, replaced by a flash of surprise that softened into genuine interest. His security team glanced at one another, suddenly less tense. The executives turned in unison toward the sound, their eyes wide. Even the front desk receptionist's jaw dropped. The man in the work uniform straightened slightly, mop still in hand, and spoke again. His tone warm yet professional, as though welcoming an old friend. For a heartbeat, the entire lobby held. Still, as if unsure whether to believe what they were seeing. Then the billionaire stepped forward, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He responded in Mandarin, his voice lighter now, the frustration replaced by curiosity. The workman replied smoothly, nodding toward the elevators as if to say, "Shall we?" The billionaire chuckled softly, gesturing for him to lead the way. The executives looked at one another, their carefully rehearsed greetings rendered meaningless, without fanfare. The man in the uniform set his mop against the wall and began walking beside the billionaire, their conversation flowing like water between two old acquaintances. The tension that had gripped the lobby dissolved, replaced by a strange, almost electric quiet, the kind of silence that comes when something extraordinary has just happened, and no one knows quite what to do next. For a moment, no one moved. The billionaire stood frozen mid-step, his eyes locked on the man in the work uniform, as if trying to decide whether he'd really heard what he thought he had. The sound of fluent, perfectly articulated Mandarin had sliced clean through the awkward silence of the lobby, replacing confusion with stunned disbelief. The staff gaped openly, their carefully maintained, corporate composure shattered. One of the executives blinked several times, as though waiting for the man to stumble over his words, or reveal it had been a lucky guess. But there was no hesitation. No searching for vocabulary. The janitor spoke with the confidence of someone who not only knew the language, but understood the culture behind it. The billionaire's stern, controlled expression softened almost immediately. The tight line of his mouth eased into the faintest smile, a rare warmth that hadn't been seen since he stepped through the doors. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and for the first time that morning, he appeared at ease. The janitor's tone was smooth and respectful, carrying the natural rhythm of a native speaker rather than the halting delivery of a beginner. Welcomed the billionaire, as though greeting a guest of honor, speaking with the kind of polished courtesy that suggested both respect for the man and confidence in himself. The words flowed effortlessly. He acknowledged the billionaire's long journey, expressed understanding of the frustration caused by the lack of communication, and assured him that he could now receive accurate information about anything he wished to know. Then, with an open-handed gesture toward the elevators, he suggested a proper tour of the facilities so that the visitor could see the company's work for himself. The corporate manager, standing stiffly nearby, stepped forward quickly, a strained smile plastered on his face. "Sir, thank you, but we can take it from here," he said in a low voice, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of a janitor leading such an important guest. It was less about language and more about image, about the optics of having a man in a uniform with cleaning supplies representing the company in front of a billionaire investor. He reached out as if to steer the conversation back to himself, but the billionaire didn't even glance at him. Instead, he gestured toward the janitor, speaking in Mandarin with a quiet firmness that made his decision final. His tone was simple, his meaning unmistakable. "This man will guide me." The security team adjusted their positions, subtly falling in step behind the billionaire and his chosen interpreter. The manager's hand dropped awkwardly to his side. His lips pressed into a thin line. The executives exchanged looks, some of them annoyed, some baffled, a few openly curious. But none of them dared argue, not with the billionaire's approval already secured. And so the unlikely pair began walking toward the elevators, conversing with an ease that bordered on familiar. The billionaire's voice, once sharp and impatient, now carried a lighter tone, the clipped syllables giving way to a more conversational cadence. The janitor responded with fluid precision, weaving in technical terms, cultural references, and subtle nuances that no translation app could hope to replicate. He spoke not just of the company's products and services, but of broader industry trends, shifts in the global market, and how certain innovations aligned with business strategies in China? The billionaire listened intently, occasionally tilting his head in approval or laughing softly at a clever turn of phrase. It wasn't just the words, it was the delivery, the understanding, the respect for cultural etiquette. The janitor navigated the conversation with the kind of ease that only came from experience, adapting seamlessly between formal and casual tones, making the billionaire feel understood on every level. From the edges of the lobby, onlookers tried to piece together the mystery. Two junior staffers whispered to each other, wondering if the janitor had once lived in China. One of the security guards muttered under his breath about how he'd never seen someone switch languages so naturally. A secretary, peering from behind her desk, shook her head in disbelief. "It's not just speaking it," she murmured. "He's speaking it better than half the professionals I've met." The manager trailed behind them, still visibly uneasy, but powerless to reclaim control of the situation. Every time he attempted to edge closer, the billionaire would lean slightly toward the janitor, listening to some new insight or responding to a question that made him smile. The balance of authority had shifted. Everyone in the lobby could feel it. As the elevator doors opened and the small group stepped inside, the conversation deepened. The janitor drew comparisons between the company's operations and successful models in Asia, demonstrating not only his command of Mandarin, but also his business acumen. The billionaire nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing in thought before breaking into another smile. There was laughter, now real laughter, filling the confined space, an unthinkable contrast to the tense, silent ride that might have happened otherwise. When they emerged onto the executive floor, the energy had transformed entirely. The billionaire no longer moved with the guarded detachment he had shown earlier. Instead, he seemed engaged, energized, and far more open to what the company had to offer. The janitor walked beside him, mop and cleaning supplies left far behind. In the lobby, carrying himself with quiet assurance, those who had been skeptical just minutes ago now found themselves watching closely. Some even impressed, despite themselves. No one had dared interrupt the flow of conversation, partly because they couldn't understand a word, and partly because they sensed that any interference would only weaken their standing in the billionaire's eyes. It was clear to everyone that the mood had shifted completely. The frustration and impatience that had threatened to derail the visit were gone. In their place was a rapport and easy, genuine connection built, not on titles or prepared presentations, but on respect, understanding, and the simple fact of being able to speak to someone in their own language without filters or barriers. And in that moment, the janitor was no longer just a man with a mop. He was the most important person in the building. The tour began in the heart of the company's operations floor, a vast open space where engineers and technicians worked in focused silence. Machines hummed steadily, screens flickered with streams of data, and the faint scent of metal and fresh wiring lingered in the air. The billionaire walked slowly, his eyes scanning every detail, asking sharp questions in Mandarin about processes, materials, and production timelines. Without missing a beat, the janitor translated each query into English for the engineers, then relayed their answers back to the billionaire with absolute precision. There was no hesitation in his delivery, no fumbling over technical terms. He used the exact industry vocabulary that made the explanations clear and credible. Even complex engineering concepts rolled naturally off his tongue, as if he had worked in the field for years. The executives followed closely, trying to contribute. But every time they spoke, they're polished. Rehearsed lines sounded stiff and hollow compared to the janitor's fluid exchanges. They repeated talking points from the company brochure, while the janitor added real depth, explaining how each department's work aligned with market needs in China, drawing subtle parallels to industries the billionaire already knew. The visitors' eyes lit up at these comparisons, nodding as if finally hearing a language, both literal and figurative, that he understood. As they moved to the design lab, the billionaire slowed, taking in the sleek prototypes displayed under glass. He asked about the design philosophy, why certain shapes were chosen over others, what challenges had been faced during production. The janitor not only translated the answers but framed them in a way that resonated culturally, weaving in analogies, drawn from Chinese proverbs and historical references. The billionaire smiled at this, clearly appreciating the effort. Then, as they passed one workstation, an engineer made a quick joke about a stubborn piece of equipment. The executives, already tense, ignored it, but the janitor caught it instantly. Without losing the rhythm of the conversation, he translated the joke into Mandarin, adjusting it so it made sense culturally. The billionaire laughed out loud. A deep, genuine laugh that echoed in the lab and drew surprised glances from nearby staff. The atmosphere shifted. The executives, who had been standing like rigid ornaments, began to relax slightly, though a few exchanged wary looks. It was becoming painfully clear that without the janitor's intervention, the entire visit would have unraveled before it began. Now, instead of walking through the building in cold detachment, the billionaire was leaning in to inspect products, asking for demonstrations, and most importantly, smiling. The staff working along the tour path watched in silent amazement. They knew who this man with the mop was, and seeing him command the attention of one of the most powerful investors in the world felt surreal. At one point, in the quiet between departments, the billionaire shifted the conversation away from the company. His tone softened, the businesslike edge giving way to curiosity. He asked the janitor about his life, where he had traveled, how he came to learn Mandarin so fluently, what he believed about success and hard work. The janitor answered with humility, but also with the self-assurance of someone who knew the value of his experiences. He spoke of years spent in different parts of the world, of learning languages not just from books, but from people, of believing that respect was the most valuable currency in any culture. The billionaire listened intently, occasionally nodding in agreement. He even shared a few personal stories of his own about early struggles and the mentors who had shaped his journey. As they reached the research department, the conversation effortlessly wove between business and life philosophy. The billionaire began to address the janitor not with the distant formality he had used earlier, but with the warmth reserved for a peer. His security team, still watchful, seemed at ease, occasionally exchanging knowing looks as if they too sensed the significance of this unexpected connection. The executives trailing behind had gone quiet. Their earlier discomfort was giving way to a dawning realization. Today's success wasn't in the slick presentations they had prepared, but in the human bridge walking 2 steps ahead of them. Without him, the billionaire's first impression would have been one of frustration, perhaps even offense. Now, there was genuine rapport, trust, and even a hint of friendship forming. Near the end of the tour, as they passed through the final department, the billionaire slowed his pace. He glanced briefly at his assistant, then leaned closer to speak in a low tone that the others couldn't quite catch. The assistant nodded, pulling out a tablet and typing quickly. The janitor noticed but said nothing, continuing to explain the last section of the facility. Whatever was being decided was happening quietly, but it carried weight. The assistant's expression alone suggested it was something significant. When they finally returned to the elevator, the mood was entirely different from the tense, awkward silence of earlier. There was an energy in the air, a sense that something important had shifted. The executives could feel it in the billionaire's demeanor, calm, open, even pleased. The assistant's hurried note-taking and discreet nods only confirmed it. By the time the elevator doors closed, every member of the corporate staff had the same unspoken thought. Something big was about to happen. And it all hinged on the man who, just an hour ago, had been quietly pushing a mop in the lobby. The boardroom was a place built for power-long polished table, leather chairs, a panoramic view of the city's skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. It had hosted countless high-stakes meetings, but never one that began quite like this. The billionaire entered first, still speaking quietly with the janitor at his side, their conversation flowing in easy Mandarin. His security detail stood near the door, watchful but relaxed. The executives and board members took their seats quickly, straightening their posture, eager to hear the final verdict. The corporate manager sat closest to the head of the table, his forced smile hiding the anxiety simmering beneath. When the billionaire took his place, the room fell silent. He didn't rush to speak, instead taking a slow glance around at every face in the room before folding his hands on the table. In Mandarin, he began to speak, his words translated into English by his assistant for the benefit of the others. He announced that he had made his decision. He would proceed with a substantial investment in the company, one that would secure its future for years to come. Relief rippled through the executives. Some exhaled audibly, others allowed the corners of their mouths to lift into cautious smiles. But the billionaire wasn't finished. His gaze shifted toward the man sitting quietly at the far end of the table, the janitor, still in his work uniform. He said that while the company's operations and products were impressive, those were not the true reasons for his decision. Instead, what had convinced him was the humility, knowledge, and cultural respect shown by the one person who truly understood me today. The room stilled. Several heads turned sharply toward the janitor, disbelief flickering in their eyes. The billionaire continued, explaining that business was built on trust and understanding, and that no presentation, however polished, could replace the connection formed when someone genuinely bridged the gap between two worlds. Then, in a gesture that left the entire boardroom stunned, he rose from his seat, walked to the janitor, placed a hand on his shoulder. In Mandarin, with a warmth that needed no translation, he invited him to sit at the main table for the signing ceremony. The janitor hesitated for a moment, glancing around the room at the suits and ties. But the billionaire's smile left no room for refusal. Slowly, the janitor rose and walked to the head of the table, taking a seat beside one of the most powerful men in the world. Cameras flashed as the billionaire signed the agreement, then slid the document toward the company's CEO. Before the meeting concluded, he turned once more to the janitor and addressed him directly in Mandarin, thanking him publicly for saving the meeting, for representing the company's spirit better than anyone else could have, and for proving that respect and understanding were the foundation of all lasting partnerships. The words carried weight, and even those who didn't speak Mandarin could feel their sincerity in the tone and expression. The manager, Al's earlier arrogance now replaced with visible discomfort, stood and cleared his throat. He apologized too, the janitor for underestimating him, admitting that he had made assumptions based solely on appearance and position. Several executives followed suit, offering quiet words of gratitude and, in some cases, awkward handshakes. The janitor accepted their apologies with the same calm dignity he had shown all day, never gloating, never seeking to embarrass anyone. When the formalities ended, the billionaire lingered, still chatting with the janitor as they walked toward the exit. The conversation was warm, filled with laughter and the occasional knowing nod. They parted with a firm handshake and mutual respect in their eyes. The billionaire's final words in Mandarin, leaving the janitor smiling, faintly to himself. The rest of the staff stood in the lobby as the billionaire and his team departed, their expressions a mix of awe and reflection. They had witnessed something rare, a moment that stripped away the layers of status and reminded them that value was not measured by a job title or a tailored suit. A few minutes later, the janitor returned to the corner of the lobby where his mop and cleaning cart still waited. Without ceremony, he picked up the handle and resumed where he had left off, the swish of the mop against the marble floor sounding almost poetic now. There was no visible change in him, no outward sign that he had just been the central figure. In a meeting that would shape the company's future, simply did his work, steady and unhurried, as though the events of the day were just another part of his routine. The building seemed quieter in that moment. The usual clatter of activity, softened by the weight of what had just transpired. Those who had seen it unfold knew they would remember it for a long time, not because of the investment deal, but because of the man who had bridged worlds with nothing more than respect, skill, and the courage to speak up when it mattered. The story didn't need embellishment. It would live on in the quiet glances between colleagues and the silent acknowledgement that true worth is often hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to be revealed.